Cars are not the answer. The reasons for this involve a wide range of data and stories, so with your permission, I'd like to ground our complex narrative on a personal note. I was 2 when my family moved to Detroit. We lived in Lafayette Park, a downtown mixed-use, mixed-height development built around a large park. At age 5, I could walk to a store by myself to spend a birthday dime. By age 6, I walked to school every day and biked all over the park. The way this neighborhood was designed meant that I would never encounter a car on those errands. It was a wonderful place to live, and it still looks the same today, 50 years later. I was 8 when we moved to Hawaii. We lived in this building at a density of 300 homes per acre, and we didn't own a car. From day 1, I walked by myself to school or rode the city bus. And the design of our building and the bus system made for a great life. I'll provide some details later. These early experiences have shaped my values as an urban ecological designer. When Senator Chang asked me to talk about cars from this perspective, he suggested the title, Cars Aren't the Answer. That was clever because it forced me to look at what design questions cities are really trying to answer with cars. Well, the simplest question is, how do we move people in cities? But you may well wonder, why should we even ask this question at all? I mean, isn't it too late? Aren't cities already designed for cars? And given how dependent we are on cars, given how much people value their cars and even identify themselves by the car they drive, aren't cities and developers and planning organizations already locked into accommodating the world's most popular mode of transportation? Well, consider this. The United Nations forecasts that the world's urban population will grow by more than 2 billion people over the next 30 years. That's over 200,000 more people every day. That's an urban Honolulu every 2 days, an Oahu or Columbus, Ohio, where I live, every 5 days, a Singapore every month. In addition to that, climate change is projected to displace up to 3 billion people from their homes over the next 3 decades. This population does overlap the urbanization forecast, but we're also seeing large numbers of people fleeing affluent urban areas of the west coast of the United States due to wildfires and settling in the Midwest. This is ramping up demand for housing in those areas. Even neglecting those trends, over the next 3 decades, we'll still need to replace about a third of existing homes. We'll need to rebuild virtually every roadway through routine maintenance, and we'll have to replace our cars 2.5 times. So we're going to see a really huge amount of construction and reconstruction over the next 3 decades. Doesn't it make sense to take a critical look at whether cars have met our needs and, in light of new technologies, ask whether we could design something better? I will focus on the United States because our car-dependent model of development has been copied often and contains many cautionary lessons. Our 2 design criteria are access, of course, and quality of life. In order to inform our choices, I'll be paying close attention to the full economic costs of cars, including impacts on social equity and the externalized and opportunity costs of cars. This is important because if you consider cars only from the standpoint of access, they clearly outshine other modes of transportation. Makes sense, right? U.S. cities are designed for cars. The other modes are mere afterthoughts. This is reflected in our language. Urban footpaths are called sidewalks. Bike lanes are a relatively recent addition, and safe bike lanes are very recent in the U.S. So it shouldn't be a surprise that cars perform well in their nominal function, getting people to work in the city. Most people don't like to spend more than about 15 minutes commuting to work. If we're close enough to walk comfortably in that time, we'll do it. Some of us will spend a bit more time on a bike. For longer distances, we'll almost always drive, if we can afford it. Through most of the U.S., mass transit is a painfully slow last resort. Hunting for parking in a city can consume a lot of time, the equivalent of 2 workdays per year on average in the U.S., and more than a work week in the UK and Germany. In New York City, it's 2.5 work weeks, more than the amount of vacation most of us get in the States. In addition, the cost of paying for parking varies enormously within and among cities. In New York, it averages over $5,000 a year. The access that cars provide comes at enormous cost in terms of land use. A very detailed study from the Victoria Transportation Policy Institute concluded that roads and parking spaces use up to 20 to 50% of the land in cities. This is an underestimate because the car sales and service industry occupies a lot of land. So do the architectural responses to streets and parking. Here's what I mean. This is a street near where I live in Columbus, Ohio. Notice that while the street itself is just 30 feet wide, the road verge adds 60% to that width. Additionally, the houses are set back more than 20 feet from the sidewalk, another response to car traffic. Before there were cars in cities, setbacks were generally much smaller, typically 10 feet or less, as seen in older European towns. Even ignoring the setbacks, car infrastructure and our responses to it occupy anywhere from 32 to 80% of the surface of a city. This has immediate consequences for transportation efficiency because it increases distances that must be traveled by over a factor of 2 in some cases. The enormous land use dedicated to cars also comes with a vast opportunity cost. I know this street in San Jose doesn't look like much. You can see the pavement's cracked and worn, but according to a new study out of UCLA, the land it occupies would fetch millions on the housing market, or about $250,000 per household on this street. If you could develop it, of course there'd be more inventory and housing would be less expensive. The area occupied by streets is therefore a major factor contributing to high housing prices and a lack of affordable housing. Let's look at the cost of car ownership through the lens of social equity. New cars cost somewhere in the range of $24,000 to $47,000. With depreciation, taxes, gas, parking, and maintenance, the average annual cost of ownership in the United States is $8,500. Of course, this figure varies. Honolulu has it easy with an annual cost of ownership of about $5,000, and it's correspondingly higher in cities like New York. These prices are a fraction of the median wealth of white families in America. But for black families, a new car is more than their median net worth, and the annual expense of owning a car is half of their median net worth. As a result, car ownership is lower among black families. Fewer black people have driver's licenses, which is making it harder to vote in many states. This is just one way that cars intensify inequality and disenfranchisement. Now you might wonder, why are black families so much poorer than white families on average in the United States? Well, of course it's racism, which subtly shapes our institutions. In this case, it was U.S. policy, drafted in the 1930s. When the government started guaranteeing mortgages, it mapped cities by supposed lending risk. The black enclaves were redlined, meaning that people in these areas couldn't get loans. This locked generations of black families out of the single most important vehicle for accumulating generational wealth in U.S. history. Redlined neighborhoods were vulnerable when cities put in new highways. They had fewer resources to mount a legal fight, so houses were demolished, highways went in, and communities were literally torn to bits. Again, cars and their infrastructure deepen the harms of inequality. Just to give you a sense of the costs of prioritizing car infrastructure, Portland, Oregon has 4,842 lane miles of streets. It has only 300 miles of bikeways. Those 300 miles cost about $60 million to build. That's the same as 1 mile of 4-lane highway. Bike-friendly Portland has 15 times more roads than bikeways, and the roads cost far more per mile. So much for access. Let's look at quality of life. Modern cities are noisy. It's a major aggravation, and most of it comes from cars. Quiet is one of the major selling points of the suburbs. This drives sprawl, hence the demand for more noisy highways and bypasses that intrude on people's suburban dreams. In many places, we're now in our second, third, or fourth generation of children growing up being chauffeured to and from school, soccer practice, play dates, and the mall by their parents. They live in a bubble that profoundly inhibits their social development. As I mentioned before, I was lucky enough to grow up in a place that gave me more freedom. I rode the city bus to school, to soccer practice, shops, friends' homes, even to the dentist on my own. I made friends at school, on the bus, on the streets, and the pool deck of the building where I lived, and we planned and scheduled our own play dates and sports matches. Wherever we went, random adults would notice our every misdeed or good deed and loudly call us out. This was our life, every day, for thousands of days the whole time we were growing up. It shaped our character. It gave us a visceral sense of public life and everyday civics. It built our confidence in dealing with all kinds of people. It gave us an internal compass of responsibility and punctuality, all of which now falls to car-bound parents to somehow conjure out of thin air for their children. And they can't, because in a car, children lack personal agency over their schedule and direct contact on their own with the big, wide world. I have met many, many young adults who were mis-socialized by the car. These are the ones who needed helicopter parents when they started college. Bear in mind that it wasn't their fault at all that they grew up in an unwalkable place. As leaders, as planners, as designers, as parents, it's our fault for letting this continue to happen. Unwalkable neighborhoods tend to isolate people. The public health term for this is severance, and it's deadly, leading to as much as a fourfold increase in mortality compared to walkable places. When people can't reach each other, they can't help each other during disasters or times of personal need. We're all too familiar with the most shocking externality of cars, the horrific death and injury toll from car crashes. It's like every country is fighting a protracted war in traffic every year. According to the American Association for the Surgery of Trauma, car crashes account for more than 3/4 of all trauma cases. In Columbus, Los Angeles, and countless other places, it feels like a war at rush hour. Chances are everyone on this call knows someone who died or was seriously injured in traffic, probably several people. But there's a hidden toll that's much worse. For everyone you know who died or was injured in a car crash, you probably know 2, 3, maybe even 4 others who were killed or sickened by chronic disease due to cars. We're talking about cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. The first cause is obvious, air pollution from car exhausts. The subtler and far deadlier cause is inactivity. That's the giant opportunity cost of relying on cars to move people around in cities. We miss out on the exercise benefits of active transportation, walking or bicycling. This hidden cost is 2.4 times worse than crashes and probably dominates our health spending. Finally, let's talk about the environmental toll of cars. This is probably what you expected me to spend the most time on, but generations of famous activists from Jimmy Carter to Al Gore to Greta Thunberg have already spent decades guilt-tripping us about cars. Cars are responsible for 15% of the CO2 that's causing climate change. Their manufacture and disposal destroys habitats, so do streets and roads. Roadways not only encroach on habitats directly, they fracture habitats into areas too small for many species to remain viable, especially climax trees that are adapted to thrive in thick forests. And notice that the guilt trips didn't work. Pandemic aside, we drive more than ever. We can't help it. Our cities are designed for cars. Oh, I could go on, but you get the idea. Cars are not the answer for all the reasons summarized on this slide. The top 2 rows are yellow. This reflects how commuting, parking, noise, and mis-socialization are highly visible, mostly qualitative things that we tolerate only in the absence of better alternatives. The red items are extremely costly in terms of land use, the forces that amplify inequality, and direct damage to our well-being and the environment. This is an extremely bad report card. Cars as a design system to move people in cities earn 4 C's and 6 F's. Can we do better? Well, couldn't we just make better cars? What's the report card for a self-driving electric vehicle? There's a lot we don't know yet, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt in most cases. If they turn out a lot safer than human drivers, maybe they can drive faster and closer together without a crash. That would make the commute faster, and when you arrive at your destination, what's to keep them from simply going back out on the road without a passenger? That would make parking a big win, but it would also double the number of cars on the road. So the jury's out about whether it makes your commute any faster. There's nothing about EVs that would reduce the cost and inequities built into the land use, consumer cost, and infrastructure cost. Most automotive noise is simply rolling noise from the tires, so no change there, maybe worse if the cars go faster than today's cars. We still have problems with mis-socialization, though probably a bit less with severance, at least for the wealthy. Ah, the health toll. No exhaust, no crashes, no problem, right? Not really. Remember, the biggest cause of death was inactivity, so health-wise, even perfectly crash-proof EVs still get a big red F. As for the environment, they don't contribute as much atmospheric carbon, but the road infrastructure still does a lot of damage. I'll be generous and give EVs a C. That's still 4 Fs out of 10 and too many Cs. Still not a passing grade. Well, what can we do about it? Can cities exist without cars? Sure. Venice, Italy has gotten along fine for 1,300 years. So did the entire world before 1920. But canals aren't a one-size solution. And who wants to go back to the horse and buggy era? Instead, let's imagine a much better future. My 42-episode Edenicity podcast takes a deep dive into designing car-free, food and energy-secure cities. One key to this design is an overall density twice as much as urban Honolulu. The transportation design has 3 parts: footpaths, accounting for 2.4% of the land use, underground point-to-point loop transit with 0 street presence, and the solar-sheltered bikeways at 1.3% of the total land use. Edenicity grows all its food on site, so its density is about 8 homes per acre. When I reran the numbers for 1,000 homes per acre, the footpaths and bikeways got bigger, but still much smaller than car infrastructure in today's cities. I did a full energy accounting, and walking is 10 times more energy efficient than driving. I'm comparing the calories consumed per kilometer to the efficiency of a gasoline-powered car with 1.54 passengers. The footpaths are about 3 times more energy efficient than a road with a Tesla. Given the land use figures for cars and streets, this design can double to quadruple the urban density with no additional crowding. But without cars, it could accommodate much higher densities with far less noise and health risk than the roadways of today's cities generate. At higher densities, emergency services don't need to go as fast to provide the same level of service that they do in today's cities. For example, ambulances go something like 60 miles an hour or 100 kilometers an hour in urban Honolulu, where the density is 4 homes per acre. To provide the same level of service at 1,000 homes per acre, an ambulance would not have to go faster than a brisk walk. This could be provided by a stretcher or an electric runabout. At these densities, you don't have to bore much tunnel to provide longer-distance point-to-point service. Elon Musk's Boring Company can put in tunnels for about $10 million a kilometer, a tiny fraction of what tunnels used to cost. Self-driving electric pods don't have to cope with weather or pedestrians, so they should be able to offer extreme safety and speed with point-to-point navigation. At least that's the goal. Here's where it stands today. This is the Las Vegas Convention Center loop system, a 1.7-mile loop that uses plain old Teslas and is rated at 4,000 passengers per hour. Now, there's enough tunnel length for these cars to accelerate to 100 kilometers an hour, but the fire department has limited their speed to 60 for now. You need about 700 straight meters of tunnel to get up to a nominal 200 kilometers an hour, so systems as fast as the previous slide will have to wait for longer tunnels in larger cities. The whole point of a system like this is that you're reusing vehicles many times per hour at higher ridership per vehicle than private cars. This can reduce the number of vehicles required to service everyone in the city by a factor of over 100. The tunnel lengths are short, their lane capacities are high due to automation, so the overall system expense is very low compared with surface streets. In Edenicity, I ran the numbers and found the system could deliver commutes of 4 minutes for a food-secure city of 5 million people at a density of about 8 homes per acre. Obviously, this could be faster for a higher density city. At 1,000 homes per acre, loop transit could offer almost elevator-like service point to point. Depending on utilization and pod size, it can be 10 to 35 times more energy efficient than a car, or 1 to 3.5 times as efficient as walking. In Edenicity, I spoke about making bicycling an all-weather solution. Simple, right? Just cover your bike paths to provide shelter. Building a shelter over a bike path nearly doubles its cost per kilometer, but remember, that cost was 300 times less per kilometer than a highway. So let's go ahead and double it to pay for the shelter. Now triple that number again, and you can include solar photovoltaic panels in the roof, plus battery storage at today's prices. That would power 1,500 high-density, high-efficiency homes per kilometer of bikeway. You could make it boxy like I did, or hire a real architect and get something wicked cool like this award-winning design by the German architect Peter Kutzia. By the way, bikeways are at least 8 times more space efficient than roads at the same level of service. Bikes are 28 times more energy efficient than cars, 3 times faster than walking, and 3 times more efficient than walking. The bike paths also offer block redundancy to back up the loop transit system. That is to say, if the loop is out of service, bikeways can help fill the transportation gap. Here's the report card for a car-free, high-density city. Unlike even electric cars, we're looking at straight A's across the board. Most distances are short enough to walk in 15 minutes or less. Bikes and rapid transit get you anywhere in even less time. Parking is not an issue. Transportation occupies a much smaller fraction of the land, so we save a ton on infrastructure. Consumer transport costs 10 times less. It's quiet. You have full access to the city throughout your life. There's no severance. Your health costs are at least 50% lower, and the environmental toll is minuscule. Car-free, high-density cities will prosper. They'll have much lower health and transportation costs and much more social equity. These will be clean, quiet, child-friendly places to live, and employers will flock to them. But building or rebuilding them in this way will take large-scale integrated development. For that, we need very gutsy leaders, planners, and developers, and we need a public that understands what's at stake and takes action. Maybe this will help motivate you. This is the Packard automotive plant that closed in 1957. Detroit in 1950 had a population of 1.8 million people. Today, that population is 670,000. It's been in steady decline the whole time. The tax base dried up, services were cut. It's a vicious cycle. If you watched the Eminem movie 8 Mile that was set in Detroit back in 2002, you saw block after block, mile after mile of abandoned or burned down homes, shops, and factories. Cities that cling to the past will suffer this same fate. People will move away to places where they can find some mix of higher quality of life, more job opportunities, more social justice, or a lower cost of living. And they'll seldom, if ever, look back. Cars are not the answer for moving people in cities. If you want a better future for your city as a citizen, here's what you can do. First of all, resist in-town highway and road expansions. Support dedicated bike lanes. Remember, bike infrastructure is 8 times more efficient than roads, so bike lanes more than pay for the space they occupy. Support innovative rapid public transit, such as Underground Loop. And most of all, support high-density, mixed-use projects, such as apartments over shops. And yes, I mean support these in your neighborhood. Because cars are not the answer. High-density, walkable, mixed development and a fresh look at rapid transit is the answer to moving people quickly in cities with a high quality of life for all.